Maplewood Estates is a 147-home HOA community outside Riverside County. Monthly dues are $185. I moved here after my divorce looking for a quiet place to rebuild and a backyard where a small woodworking shop could live on a corner lot. I expected ordinary governance, predictable rules, responsive administration, and maintenance consistent with the assessments everyone pays. Within 3 weeks, a routine problem became my introduction to how enforcement worked. Someone vandalized my mailbox. I bought an identical replacement, same design, same height, and installed it. Days later, a certified envelope arrived. Unapproved exterior modifications, a $150 fine, and $50 per day until a compliance hearing. I pulled the CC&Rs and searched for any mailbox replacement procedure. There wasn't one. To understand what standards meant in practice, I walked the neighborhood. Dozens of identical mailboxes stood at regulation height. Many were clearly newer than mine. None displayed violation tags. I photographed what I saw, labeled dates and addresses, and began a file to compare claims with conditions visible from the sidewalk. The goal wasn't drama. It was documentation. Neighbors noticed the camera and the clipboard. Marcus at number 47, an electrician, told me his solar installation, permitted and inspected, had still drawn repeated challenges from the association. Mrs. Chen at number 23, who keeps a carefully tended flower bed, had been cited for excessive garden decorations because she displayed 3 ceramic gnomes. The stories were different, but the theme was familiar. Newer residents and working professionals seemed to receive closer scrutiny than long-timers. I requested the association's financial records, a homeowner right under state law. The president, Cordelia Blackthorne, age 49 and in her 8th year leading the board, acknowledged my request, then postponed fulfillment with rolling explanations and scheduling issues. While I waited, I visited the association office in the community center. The space was functional but worn, peeling laminate, tired furniture, and a bulletin board with curling notices. On the wall, the posted budget summary listed line items and annual totals. A simple calculation, 147 households paying $185 per month, suggested roughly $388,000 in yearly dues. I compared that figure with what the eye could see: deferred paint, dated fixtures, and a community center that appeared lightly used. That mismatch didn't prove anything standing alone, but it made complete transparency essential. From the beginning, I kept the record methodical. Every letter, voicemail, and photograph went into a dated folder. Every conversation was logged with time and place. The point wasn't to argue personalities or motives. It was to establish facts about notices, procedures, and the way rules were applied. By the end of those first weeks, the file contained a clear chronology: a vandalized mailbox, an identical replacement, a citation unsupported by any written mailbox rule, neighborhood comparators showing similar conditions without citations, and a standing request for financial records awaiting access. With baselines established, the next steps were simple: keep documenting, compare paper to practice, and measure governance against obligations the association publishes for everyone, accurately. Architectural review began with a straightforward request: a 6-foot cedar privacy fence to partition the backyard workshop area from view, and to reduce incidental noise. I submitted the association form, paid the $75 review fee, and received a time-stamped receipt acknowledging the submittal. After 30 days, then 40, no written decision arrived. On day 47, the only update recorded in my email archive stated that the application remained in careful review. I logged each date, saved every message, and prepared a parallel track focused on boundary verification and documentation integrity. For redundancy, I kept digital and printed copies of every item, so the record could not disappear. On Friday, a licensed surveyor marked the lot with bright orange flags and established GPS coordinates along the property line. His sealed sketch referenced the recorded plat, and the crew triple-checked the measurements. The seal and signature page identified the preparer, and the coordinate list corresponded to each staked point. I placed the survey packet with my deed, the application copy, and the municipal permit confirmation so that all related materials were together and reproducible. With the paperwork organized, I returned to the practical task scheduled for the weekend. At 7 a.m. Saturday, I began digging post holes along the line indicated on the survey. Marcus stopped by with coffee. Mrs. Chen waved from her garden. Earl from number 156 offered to help move materials. Each planned post position sat 6 inches inside the recorded boundary shown on the coordinate table. I kept my notebook open and entered times beside each location as the work progressed, maintaining the same discipline I use in court matters. I paused only for inspections and then resumed along the same surveyed alignment. At 9:17 a.m., a white Lexus pulled to the curb and idled. President Cordelia Blackthorne stepped onto my lawn carrying a measuring tape and asserted that the fence extended onto HOA common area. She referenced easement rights and aesthetics and stated that I was in violation. I handed her the survey packet, pointed to the coordinate table, and confirmed that every post location fell within my lot. To document the exchange accurately, I began an audio recording, which is lawful here. I preserved the audio alongside the written notes carefully. Time noted. Cordelia then called the police, reporting trespass and damage to community property. 2 squad cars arrived, 3 officers in total, led by Sergeant Rodriguez. He reviewed the survey, my deed, and the municipal permit confirmations. The officers took quick checks from the orange flags and nearby curb monuments, compared those positions to the survey's bearings, and returned the documents. Their on-scene assessment was direct. I was constructing on my own property and no criminal issue existed. They also advised Cordelia that she was standing on my lawn without permission. Cordelia moved back to the sidewalk and reiterated that materials and aesthetics remained subject to architectural approval. She departed shortly afterward. I resumed the work that complied with the surveyed boundary and updated my log to reflect the sequence. The application delay, the boundary verification, the 917 call, and the officer's assessment now formed a single chain of contemporaneous entries. Whatever the board chose to do next, the record would show diligent compliance, precise citing, and lawful conduct on my side of the line. The budget posted at the community center became my starting point. A straightforward read of the line items showed substantial recurring payments to one vendor, Pinnacle Property Services, LLC. Landscaping was listed at $89,000 for the year, and pool maintenance at $47,000. Utilities for the community center totaled $31,000, despite limited use of the building. Those figures did not by themselves settle anything. They signaled issues worth reviewing. I photographed the posting, copied the numbers into my log, and noted which entries would benefit from source documents such as contracts, invoices, and approval minutes. Using courthouse resources, I ran a business license search. The registration for Pinnacle named Derek Blackthorne. Derek is Cordelia Blackthorne's brother-in-law. I recorded that relationship exactly as it appears in the filing and moved to the next question. How had the board selected Pinnacle? And where were competitive bids commensurate with a services relationship of that size? In the materials available to me, I could not locate bidding packets, comparative quotes, or evaluation rubrics. I listed those missing items as document requests and kept the focus on dates, signatures, and the chain of authorizations reflected in the records I could access. Within days of those entries, enforcement around my property accelerated. In a single week, I received 4 violation notices. The first cited unapproved landscaping for tomatoes planted in my backyard. The second alleged excessive outdoor storage because a hose sat on a reel by the spigot. The third claimed architectural non-compliance based on a doormat that did not match neighboring styles. The fourth asserted a parking violation for leaving my pickup in my own driveway. I dated each notice, scanned it, and added it to the file next to the budget notes and the vendor registration prints. Anonymous complaints also reached city offices. One alleged I was altering a fence outside permitted parameters. Another claimed late evening tool noise beyond local quiet hours. I confirmed that the complaints existed and logged the confirmation calls without speculating about their source. On the neighborhood Facebook group, posts appeared about residents who don't respect standards, not naming anyone but addressing a current dispute. I captured screenshots with timestamps and URLs and filed them with the corresponding dates. To evaluate whether rules were being applied uniformly, I repeated my sidewalk survey. I photographed tomatoes behind other fences, hoses on reels, varied doormats, and pickups in driveways. I labeled locations only when observable from public ways and avoided windows or interiors. None of the photographed homes displayed posted violations on the days I walked. That observation sat beside the citations I received. I drew no inference beyond the documentation itself. Finally, I saved 3 voicemails from Cordelia, including one that conveyed a threat if I did not learn respect. I transcribed the exact wording and preserved the audio. I then prepared a memorandum linking the budget numbers, the vendor registration, the lack of competitive bidding materials in the files I could access, the clustered violation sequence, the external complaints, the social media posts, and my comparator photographs into a single fully contemporaneous timeline. The emergency board session convened in the community center after a notice about resident compliance issues. Only 3 of 5 directors appeared: President Cordelia Blackthorne, Eleanor Vance, and Bob Morrison. I arrived early, signed the attendance sheet, and set a folder of exhibits and a legal pad on the table. In this state, recording an open HOA meeting is lawful. I placed a small device beside the pad, announced that I was recording, and noted time in my log. Cordelia opened with Agenda Item 4, a discussion of recent violations. I requested the floor. With the chair's acknowledgement, I laid out a short sequence: the vandalized mailbox, the identical replacement, the citation without a corresponding mailbox rule, and the photographic survey showing dozens of comparable mailboxes unpenalized. Next, I displayed the 4 clustered notices from the week after my budget review: tomatoes, hose on a reel, the doormat, and driveway parking. Each document was dated and scanned. Each envelope and timestamp had been preserved. To address the question of uniform application, I presented comparator photographs taken from public vantage points: tomatoes behind fences, hoses on reels, varied doormats, pickups and driveways. No posted violation slips in the photographs. I did not speculate about causes or motives. I limited myself to what the record reflected and asked that the board identify any standard differentiators I had overlooked. Then I turned to contracting. The posted budget showed $89,000 to Pinnacle Property Services for landscaping and $47,000 for pool maintenance. A business filing identifies Pinnacle's registrant as Derek Blackthorne, the president's brother-in-law. I asked to review competitive bidding materials, vendor evaluations, and minutes documenting selection and renewal. In the files available to me, I had not located packets, quotes, scoring sheets, or award memos. I requested a timeline for producing those items for inspection. Eleanor and Bob studied the exhibits. They asked neutral questions about dates, vantage points, and how the photographs were labeled. I answered by reference to the log and the exhibit numbers. When Bob asked whether I had copies of the audio from the 917 fence incident, I confirmed I did, and that the recording, survey, and permits were already provided to management. Cordelia responded by asserting that enforcement decisions are discretionary and that architectural standards include aesthetics. She then made a motion to restrict my attendance at meetings, citing conflict and intimidation based on my profession. I waited. No second came. Bob stated calmly, "Motion dies for lack of a second." With that, Cordelia concluded the agenda. No vote was taken on selective enforcement, contracting procedures, or record production. I packed the folder, stopped the recorder, and wrote a final entry. Exhibits presented. Attendance limited to 3 directors. Motion to restrict failed. No action items adopted. The outcome did not resolve the questions, but it clarified the path forward. Maintain the record, pursue documents, and continue using the published procedures available to every homeowner. Cordelia's next step was legal escalation. She filed a restraining order petition in Riverside County, outside my judicial district, alleging harassment and misuse of position. The matter was assigned to Judge Patricia Henley, a longtime colleague from law school days whose courtroom discipline I knew well. The hearing record shows Cordelia represented by attorney Bradley Kensington. His presentation framed me as an official intimidating volunteers through legal threats. When my turn arrived, I relied solely on evidence already in the file. A chronological log of every contact, certified mail receipts, dated photographs, copies of violation notices, and sworn neighbor affidavits confirming the pattern of selective enforcement. The exhibits were numbered, cross-referenced, and delivered through standard procedure. After reviewing the materials, Judge Henley denied the petition, ruled the allegations unfounded, and sanctioned Kensington for filing without merit. The written order required Cordelia to reimburse my costs, closing the courtroom phase cleanly. That same week, I followed another documentary trail. Using professional contacts, I obtained the HOA's insurance claim history. Within the record sat 3 separate claims totaling $23,000 for landscaping damage. Maintenance, logs describing fallen branches and irrigation repairs did not align with visible conditions or resident recollection. Signatures attributed to contractors appeared inconsistent with other documents on file. Each check had been issued to Pinnacle Property Services, the same company receiving the board's principal service contracts. I added those pages to the evidence archive and annotated them by claim date, check number, and endorsement sequence. Meanwhile, neighborhood meetings shifted from complaints to planning. Marcus hosted a small gathering on his patio one evening. Mrs. Chen arrived carrying 5 years of violation notices, $3,400 in accumulated fines documented in perfect chronological order. A young couple from number 134 described listing their property because the harassment never subsided. Collectively, we concluded that internal reform required organized civic procedure, not only court filings. State statute provided the mechanism, a recall election. Maplewood's governing documents specify that 25% of homeowners, 74 of 147, may petition for recall. Once certified, the board must schedule an election within 45 days. We divided the tasks accordingly. Marcus compiled resident contact lists. Chen drafted plain language summaries of homeowners' rights to records access. I prepared educational sheets explaining proper documentation, meeting attendance, and complaint tracking. No inflammatory rhetoric, just process, statute, and transparency. By the end of that month, the focus had shifted from defense to civic structure. The failed restraining order attempt stood as a procedural footnote. The insurance anomalies pointed to potential financial misconduct, and the recall framework offered residents a lawful avenue to restore accountability. Every entry in the timeline remained factual, signed, and verifiable. Evidence continuing to grow inside a system now awakening to its own power. Retaliation arrived in layers. It began with flyers left on driveways overnight, anonymous papers accusing reformers of undermining community harmony. The next week, automated robocalls reached elderly residents warning that petitioners sought to eliminate property value protections. Social media followed. Newly created accounts posted identical statements across neighborhood pages, all echoing the same phrases that appeared on the flyers. The content was emotional, never specific. I archived each instance with timestamps and digital fingerprints, preserving links and screenshots for later verification. Soon the campaign turned physical. Reform signs vanished from lawns. Marcus discovered his truck with 4 slashed tires. Mrs. Chen found graffiti on her fence, and I woke to red spray paint across my own, phrases referencing the recall effort. The security cameras I had installed captured footage at 2:47 a.m., showing Sandra Mueller's teenage son holding the spray can. That recording handed to local police created an incident report. I logged the case number and stored the clip with previous evidence. At the same time, suspicious activity occurred inside the association office. One morning the door lock was replaced and a post-it note cited security updates. Within days, word spread that a burglary had occurred. Only financial files were missing. Hard drives failed soon after. Backup claims cited data corruption. When the community's new accounting firm was introduced, several bank statements from prior fiscal years were reported lost in transition. Behind the building, residents observed bags of shredded paper waiting for disposal. I photographed the scene and attached the images to the archive labeled Records Destruction Sequence. Rather than react publicly, we responded through documentation. Formal subpoenas issued through the prosecutor's office went directly to the HOA's banks and vendors. Forensic technicians recovered deleted financial data from servers maintained by the property management company. Duplicate insurance records were sourced from carriers' archives. Insurance firms keep everything by policy requirement. Step by step, the attempted erasure became evidence of itself. Then came the turning point. Marcus relayed a message from Derek Blackthorne, the registered owner of Pinnacle Property Services and Cordelia's brother-in-law. Derek requested a confidential meeting at a 24-hour diner outside town. When we met, he looked exhausted. He handed over a manila envelope containing original invoices, each showing inflated billing, materials never delivered, and signatures authorizing payments for non-existent work. Derek described growing pressure to continue falsifying numbers and implied direct threats against his family if he refused. I accepted the documents, signed a receipt, and forwarded copies to investigators the same day. By the end of that week, the narrative had shifted. Flyers and graffiti were background noise. The evidence now contained contractor invoices, recovered digital ledgers, and forensic confirmations linking them together. The retaliation campaign had exposed its own foundation. Panic inside a system running out of places to hide. Federal action followed the document trail. A grand jury returned an indictment charging Cordelia Blackthorne with 14 counts, including fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy. State authorities filed parallel charges for insurance fraud, tax evasion, and breach of fiduciary duty. Her real estate license was revoked. Asset freeze orders halted attempted liquidations. When she tried to leave the jurisdiction with $47,000 in cash and a one-way ticket, officers intervened. A public Facebook appeal appeared soon after, but media coverage had already widened from local segments to national outlets. Locally, county oversight installed an interim board. Its first actions were administrative and measurable: suspend fraudulent fines, process reimbursements, and stabilize operations. Insurers confirmed coverage for resident reimbursements. Sandra Mueller entered a plea to conspiracy, receiving probation and community service. Frank Delacroix, treasurer, cooperated with investigators. Derek Blackthorne fully cooperated, producing financial records that matched invoices and ledgers recovered through subpoenas and forensics. The annual HOA meeting became the clearinghouse for outcomes and next steps. 134 of Maplewood's 147 households attended. Marcus, now serving as treasurer, delivered the numbers. $89,000 in fraudulent charges reversed, and $127,000 recovered through asset forfeiture for capital improvements. During the meeting, reporter Jennifer Kim relayed a courthouse update. The jury returned guilty verdicts on 12 of 14 counts. The sentence that followed imposed 4 years in federal custody, $180,000 in restitution, and permanent license revocation. I addressed the room briefly and kept to the process. Document everything. Know your rights. Resist intimidation. With seized funds, A $45,000 community improvement fund was established. Residents voted on allocations, playground renovation, pool repairs, and a memorial garden. Recognition followed for residents whose diligence strengthened the record. Marcus for financial recovery work, Mrs. Chen for historical documentation, and Earl for steady architectural review service. Policy reform rounded out the session. The reformed board adopted competitive bidding for all contracts, monthly online publication of financials, a formal violation appeals pathway, and routine recording and publication of open meetings. Afterward, the Judicial Ethics Review concluded its inquiry into my conduct. The written findings stated that my actions remained within homeowner rights and professional obligations, and commended the community benefits achieved through orderly procedures. What remained was method. Transparent paperwork, verifiable numbers, and predictable governance. Indictments and verdicts closed one chapter. Policies and reimbursements opened another. With authorities handling prosecution and restitution, the association returned to the fundamentals residents had expected from the start: clear rules, timely records, and equal application. The documents that built the case now serve a quieter purpose: benchmarks for everyday compliance, a standard any homeowner can consult without needing a courtroom. The record, not rhetoric, guided every decision and anchored each remedial step forward for Maplewood. 6 months later, Maplewood Estates functioned less like a recovery site and more like a demonstration project. The numbers confirmed it. Property values had risen approximately 12%. There were no outstanding violation disputes, no unpaid fines, and no pending hearings. The appeals process, established to guarantee fairness, remained unused, not because it was ignored, but because enforcement itself had become consistent and transparent. Routine maintenance resumed under competitively bid contracts, each publicly posted on the community website. Meeting minutes appeared online within 48 hours of approval. The visible environment changed too. The playground equipment was replaced and met modern safety standards. The pool reopened after certified repairs funded through recovered assets. Mrs. Chen's community garden expanded into 2 adjoining lots, filled with vegetables and flowers, the 3 ceramic gnomes still standing where they had always been. What once symbolized petty enforcement now represented continuity and pride. My workshop became an informal gathering place where residents discussed projects, drafted maintenance requests, and shared tools instead of rumors. The atmosphere had shifted from suspicion to collaboration. Beyond Maplewood, the story traveled quickly. 23 other communities across 4 states contacted our board for guidance on implementing transparency protocols. County associations cited the Maplewood model in policy discussions about HOA accountability. Within the state legislature, bipartisan sponsors introduced the Maplewood Act, establishing audit requirements, term limits for board officers, and criminal penalties for fiduciary breaches. The bill passed with wide support, described publicly as practical rather than partisan. Former prosecutor Patricia Valdez, now Attorney General Valdez, credited the Maplewood investigation with shaping her anti-corruption platform. Under her office, a statewide HOA oversight task force launched to review complaint procedures and training for volunteer boards. At the community level, Mrs. Chen organized monthly workshops on civic participation, drawing attendees from neighboring counties. Earl chaired the Veterans Memorial Garden Committee, where the new flagpole stood without challenge. Each meeting began with a brief reading of residents' rights, reinforcing lessons learned through experience rather than lecture. Cordelia Blackthorne served 3 years of a 4-year sentence before transfer to supervised release, continuing restitution payments required by court order. Her former residence was sold to a young family whose children filled the sidewalks with chalk drawings, small evidence that normal life had returned. Marcus's electrical business expanded, employing 2 additional neighbors and contracting with nearby HOAs seeking ethical vendors. The reforms did not create perfection, They produced predictability, a framework residents could trust. When journalists revisited Maplewood, they found no grand speeches, just minutes, ledgers, and smiles. The model existed in the ordinary: open records, lawful procedures, and a community that learned governance works best when everyone can see how it happens. 6 months proved the point that stability, once elusive, can be documented as thoroughly as wrongdoing once was.